All right. So, everyone loves a good investment opportunity, right?
Yeah.
The promise of, big returns, maybe even financial freedom. But you always got to remember there's two sides to that coin sometimes. What looks like a golden ticket can actually lead you down a rabbit hole of, questionable practices, and poof, your money's gone. So today we're doing a deep dive into the Ashbrookes Group Limited loan note investigation. It's a story with all the ingredients of a financial thriller. You got your red flags, you got your potential investor nightmares, and it's a bit of a wild ride.
It really highlights how an investment that looks totally legit on paper can just unravel. And we're talking about Ashbrookes Group Limited. Mm-hmm. They also go by Ashbrookes Inspired, and their loan note product, they were trying to raise funds for Arimco Ltd, which operates under the Ashbrookes umbrella. So far, so good, right? We'll just wait.
So we've got reports, financial statements, even whispers from people who thought they were getting in on a pretty sweet real estate deal. What's the first sign that something's not right?
The loan note was supposed to raise, get this, £3.25 million, which usually means a pretty big venture. But here's where things get interesting. This past January, Arimco Ltd went under, facing liabilities of over £232,000. To make matters worse, a big chunk of that debt is owed to HMRC, the UK tax authority. Not a good sign.
Oof, yeah. Owing money to the tax man, never a good look. But I'm guessing there's got to be more to this than just a company going bust, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
When Arimco Ltd went into liquidation, they had to make the list of creditors public. And here's the shocker. There's no mention of any loan note holders. So where did all that investor money go? Did it even make it to Arimco Ltd in the first place?
Wow, that's a huge red flag. It's like the money just vanished. We got to follow the money trail, figure out who's calling the shots here.
Exactly. And that's why we need to introduce the key players in this financial drama. Two names that keep popping up are Mohamed and Sophia Mushtaq. They've got close ties to Sonali Craddock and Mark Kidd, who are connected to the companies managing these loan notes.
Hold on a second. Are these the same people who were at Sonali Craddock's big 50th birthday bash? I vaguely remember reading something about that.
You've got a sharp memory. Yes, they were there hobnobbing with none other than James Baird of New Capital Link. Now, New Capital Link is another one that's been on our radar for, let's just say, some interesting business practices.
So we're talking about a tight-knit group here, folks who seem to know each other a little too well, and they're all tangled up in this loan note situation.
Yeah.
What else should our listener be looking out for?
Well, it gets even more complicated when you look at who was supposed to be safeguarding these loan notes as security trustees. Initially, it was Castle Trust and Management Services, but they went belly up liquidated, to be precise. Then the responsibility got shifted to Alpha Trustee Services Ltd, and guess who's heading that up? None other than Mark Kidd, the same guy connected to the Mushtaqs.
Wait, so they replaced one potentially shady security trustee with another one even more closely tied to the people running the whole operation? That's not exactly confidence-inspiring.
You're catching on, and there's even more shuffling going on. Administrative duties moved from Irene McKenzie to Alexandra Welsh. It's starting to look like a shell game with responsibilities constantly changing hands, so it's harder to figure out who's actually accountable.
Okay, so we've got this group with all these intertwined relationships, company going bust, investor funds that have gone missing, and a revolving door of responsibility. This is already sounding like a recipe for disaster. But let's back up a bit and focus on Mohamed Mushtaq. You mentioned something about his financial history that raised a red flag. What's the story there?
Well, Mohamed seems to have a bit of a habit of using voluntary arrangements. These are legal agreements that allow people or companies to avoid bankruptcy by restructuring their debts. Now, on the surface, there's nothing inherently wrong with that. But when it becomes a pattern, it starts to raise some eyebrows.
Yeah.
It's almost like using a legal loophole to avoid closer scrutiny.
So it's legal, but not necessarily ethical. And Arimco Ltd, the company at the heart of this whole loan note thing, they also use a voluntary arrangement, right?
Yeah. Remember HMRC, the tax authority? They actually tried to shut Arimco Ltd down by filing a winding up petition against them. A pretty serious move. Usually means a company's in deep financial trouble. But guess what? Arimco countered with a voluntary arrangement, basically dodging the shutdown again. It's legal, but makes you wonder what they're trying to hide.
Definitely seems like they were trying to avoid scrutiny, maybe even hiding how bad their financial situation really was. So we've got these suspicious connections, financial maneuvering, and a company teetering on the brink of collapse. Where does the story go from here? This is where it gets really interesting. We had a first-hand account from someone who tried to invest in an Ashbrookes Group Ltd loan note back in September 2023. They thought they knew where their money was going, but things took a very unexpected turn.
This is a classic example of why it's so important to read the fine print and really understand what you're getting into, no matter how tempting an investment might seem. This person thought they were investing directly in Ashbrookes Group Ltd, but James Baird, the guy from the fancy birthday bash, directed their money to a completely different company. S2 John Street Ltd.
Hold up, so they were promised one investment and ended up with something completely different. Sounds like a classic bait and switch. What did James Baird have to say about this?
Well, in his investment summary, he promised the investor a debenture over Ashbrookes Group Ltd, basically a legal claim on the company's assets. They were also promised a legal charge over S2 John Street Ltd, meaning they had a right to a specific property owned by that company. And to sweeten the deal, Baird said their funds would be held by a solicitor until the deal was finalized. He even said the security trustee would have first dibs on assets, so the investor's interests were supposedly protected.
On paper, it sounds like they were going above and beyond to protect the investor.
It does, doesn't it? But here's the kicker. Our investigation couldn't find any proof to back up these claims. No sign of a solicitor holding funds. No paperwork for those promised charges. It's starting to look like a carefully constructed facade designed to make investors feel secure when they really shouldn't.
This is getting shadier by the minute. So tell me about S2 John Street Ltd. Are they legit or just a shell company set up to move money around?
As of December 31st, 2023, S2 John Street Ltd. was officially balance sheet insolvent, which basically means they owe more than they own. Not exactly a picture of financial health, right? And here's the kicker. They had 0 property assets listed.
Wait, so they're offering up property as security, but they don't actually own any property. How does that even work?
Great question, and it leads us to another interesting twist in this whole saga. Remember Alpha Trustee Services Ltd., the current security trustee for the Ashbrookes loan notes? Well, back in September and November of 2023, they registered charges against both Ashbrookes Group Ltd. and S2 John Street Ltd.
Charges? What kind of charges are we talking about?
These charges were connected to a property at 6066 John Street in Sunderland. And wouldn't you know it, that address is also one of Ashbrookes' regional offices. The land registry title for this property is TY249929, and it's directly linked to those charges filed by Alpha Trustee Services.
So they're using a property that's supposed to be one of their own offices as collateral for these investments. Something seems fishy there.
It definitely raises some red flags. And here's another layer to this. In 2022, that same property was listed for £950,000. But the supposed purchase price was way lower, only £650,000.
Oh, a property losing almost a third of its value in a year. That's a massive difference even in a crazy market. Something's not adding up here.
You're right to be skeptical that price difference raises some serious questions about whether that sale was legit. Was it a genuine deal, or was that lower price a way to hide the true value of the property, maybe for tax reasons or some other financial shenanigans? These are questions that need some serious investigating.
Okay, so we've got this John Street property at the center of this whole tangled web. What else is going on with it?
Well, S2 John Street Ltd. had put in an application for planning permission to turn the building into student accommodation. But Ashbrookes came out and said the conversion fell under permitted development rights, which means they didn't need approval at all.
So they were trying to completely bypass the planning process. It sounds pretty risky to me.
It is, especially considering what happened next. Ashbrookes initially told investors they'd have planning approval by July 2024. Then they pushed that back to February 2025. And now, as of today, March 7th, 2025, the latest update says the planning decision's been delayed again.
No planning permission, and they keep moving the goalposts. Not a good sign for anyone who invested in this project.
Exactly. This delay throws a wrench into the whole loan note exit strategy. It puts investors' money at risk. Remember, the idea was that once the development was done and the property was either sold or making money, investors would get their money back with interest. But if the project stalled because of planning issues, that timeline goes out the window.
This is starting to sound like a financial house of cards about to come crashing down.
A very fitting analogy, and it gets even more complicated when we look at who actually owns this property. Land Registry records still list the owner as Elite Gemstones Properties Ltd. with a purchase price of £1.58 million back in 2014.
Wait a minute, so Ashbrookes doesn't even own the property they're using as collateral for these loan notes?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Even though Ashbrookes says they completed the purchase of 6066 John Street, we couldn't find any proof to back that up. And remember, those charges Alpha Trustee Services put on the property, those were filed before the supposed purchase was even finalized.
So the security trustee who's supposed to be protecting the investors put a charge on a property the company might not even own. This is getting ridiculous.
It is ridiculous and incredibly concerning. It makes you question whether those in charge are even competent or if they have ulterior motives. But here's one final twist to add to this already confusing situation. Despite the uncertainty about who owns the property, Ashbrookes has started working on the interior development. Their website's full of photos and updates, making it look like they're making progress.
So they're going full speed ahead, even though they might not actually own the property and they haven't even got planning permission.
It's a strange approach, to say the least. They're trying to create this image of progress, but the whole foundation of the project is shaky. It's like putting lipstick on a pig. Might look a bit better on the surface, but it's still a pig.
Well, this whole situation's starting to smell like something a pig left behind. We've covered a lot of ground here, but I have a feeling this story goes deeper than we can see right now.
You're absolutely right. Given what we found out about S2 John Street Ltd, we need to widen our investigation to look at other special purpose vehicles that operate under the Ashbrookes Group Ltd umbrella. There's a good chance this rabbit hole goes even deeper.
Welcome back to our deep dive into the Ashbrookes Group Limited loan note investigation. It's been a bit of a whirlwind so far. So before we go deeper down this rabbit hole and see what else is going on with the Ashbrookes Group, let's take a minute to recap what we've uncovered so far.
Yeah, it's easy to get bogged down in the details, so let's break down those key takeaways for our listeners.
Absolutely. We've met a lot of characters and untangled a pretty complex web of financial dealings. What should our listeners be focusing on?
The main thing to remember is that the situation with Ashbrookes Group Limited and their loan notes is full of uncertainty and potential risk. We've got those inconsistencies with the planning approvals for the John Street property that was supposed to be the big selling point for this whole investment.
Right, and we can't forget that they haven't even confirmed who owns that property, despite Ashbrookes saying they finalized the purchase.
That's right. The land registry records show a completely different owner, but the security trustee registered charges against the property before the alleged purchase was even finished. It's like trying to put a lien on a car that's not even yours yet.
That's a perfect analogy. So basically, they're playing fast and loose with investors' money, using a property as collateral that they might not even have the right to use.
You got it. And then there's S2 John Street Ltd. That's where the investors' money was sent. This company's been declared balance sheet insolvent, meaning they owe more than they have. And to top it off, they don't even list any property assets.
So if they're using property as a guarantee, but they don't own any, that's a huge problem, right? It's like promising someone a piece of cake that doesn't exist.
Exactly. That's a massive red flag, and one that any smart investor should be aware of. And we can't forget about the connections between all the major players, those overlapping roles, the fancy parties, the financial maneuvering. It all raises questions about whether they're being transparent and ethical.
So what's the big takeaway for our listeners? What's the most important lesson they should get from this deep dive?
If there's one thing you remember from today, it's this: do your due diligence before you invest a single penny, especially when you're dealing with a complicated network of companies and individuals like this one.
Don't be fooled by promises of quick money. Do your homework, look beyond the fancy marketing, dig into the finances, check the ownership structure, and research the people behind it.
And never underestimate the importance of getting professional financial advice. A good advisor can help you navigate the complexities of investing. They can explain the risks, assess the legitimacy of the opportunity, and make sure your investments match your goals and your risk tolerance.
It's like having a guide leading you through a dangerous jungle. They can help you avoid those hidden traps and dangerous paths. But what about the people who've already invested with Ashbrookes Group Limited and are feeling a bit uneasy after hearing all of this? What can they do to protect themselves?
Well, it's not too late to take action first. Gather all the documents you have related to your investment. Think of it like putting together a puzzle. We need the loan note agreement, any emails or letters, bank statements, anything that shows what happened.
That paper trail is so important if you need to take legal action right. It's proof of what they promised and what actually happened.
Absolutely. And next, you should consider reporting the situation to the authorities in the UK. That's the FCA or the SFO. They're the ones who investigate financial misconduct and try to protect people from scams.
So by reporting it, you're not only helping yourself, but you could be stopping other people from falling into the same trap.
That's right. It's about exposing these practices and holding people accountable. And I know going through something like this can feel really lonely. But remember, you're not alone. There are investor action groups out there that are specifically designed to help victims of financial fraud.
Those groups can be so helpful. They can provide a community, share resources and strategies, and remind you that you're not the only one going through this.
Right. They can offer support and help you feel empowered to take control of the situation. And finally, don't be afraid to talk to legal professionals who specialize in financial fraud and investor protection. They can help you understand your options and maybe even recover some of your lost funds.
Remember, you have rights and you don't have to go through this alone.
We really recommend contacting Insolvency and Law. They do in-depth risk assessments and have a great track record investigating financial misconduct. They can help you figure out what to do next.
Their email is investigations@insolvencyandlaw.co.uk. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need help or advice. They're a fantastic resource for anyone who's been in a situation like this now. For everyone listening who might not be directly affected by this specific case, let's zoom out for a second. What does this whole Ashbrookes story tell us about being a savvy investor and spotting those warning signs?
It's a great example of why you can't just take things at face value, especially when it comes to your money. A company can have a fancy website and make big promises, but that doesn't mean anything. You have to dig deeper, ask tough questions, and look past the surface.
Because sometimes that shiny exterior is hiding something rotten. It's like a house that looks beautiful from afar, but then you get closer and see the cracks.
Exactly. This case also shows how important transparency is in the financial industry. We have regulations, but there's always someone trying to find a loophole and operate in the shadows.
That's why we need organizations like the FCA and the SFO. They need the resources to investigate and hold people accountable, but they can't do it alone. We all have a responsibility to make the financial system more transparent and accountable.
Absolutely. And on that note, this case raises some serious questions about security trustees and their role in protecting investors.
Because they should be impartial, right? Making sure everything's above board and the investor's money is safe.
Exactly.
Sure.
But as we've seen here, things can get messy when those trustees have personal ties to the companies or people involved.
It's like putting a fox in charge of the henhouse.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It creates a conflict of interest and undermines their whole purpose. This is why we need stricter rules and more oversight for security trustees to make sure they're truly independent and looking out for the investors.
Trust is so important for a healthy financial system. If we lose trust, the whole thing falls apart.
You're right. The Ashbrookes case is just one example of how damaging financial misconduct can be. It affects individuals, families, even whole economies. We need to be vigilant, raise awareness, and work together to make sure everyone's acting ethically now. As we wrap up this part of our deep dive, I want to leave our listeners with another question to think about.
All right, hit me with it. What should our listeners be pondering?
We live in a world with so much information, but it can be overwhelming. How can we become smarter about the financial information we're consuming? How can we learn to spot those red flags, avoid scams, and protect our finances?
Those are great questions, and questions we'll keep exploring in the final part of our deep dive.
But for now, remember, knowledge is power. The more you know, the better equipped you'll be to handle the complexities of finance and make good decisions.
Well, we're back for the final part of our deep dive into the Ashbrookes Group Limited loan note investigation, and I gotta say, it's been quite a journey, hasn't it? We've uncovered a ton of concerning information, enough to make any investor a little nervous.
It's easy to get caught up in all the numbers and legal stuff, but let's not forget about the real people involved in this. There are people who put their trust and their hard-earned money into Ashbrookes Group Limited, hoping for a better future.
Yeah, absolutely. For some people, this could be their life savings, their retirement plan, their dream of financial security, and to have that put at risk by these questionable practices and potential misconduct, well, it's just heartbreaking.
You're right. These stories are a reminder that our financial choices have real consequences, and we need to be responsible not just for ourselves, but for others too.
So for our listeners who might be feeling overwhelmed or even a little discouraged by all of this, what's the most important thing to remember? What can we learn from this experience, and how can we move forward feeling more confident as investors?
I think one of the biggest takeaways here is the power of knowledge. The more we know, the better decisions we can make, and the better we can protect ourselves from getting hurt. This whole deep dive has shown us that even investments that look totally legit can still be risky.
So we can't just take a company's word for it or rely on their marketing materials, no matter how impressive they might seem.
Exactly. We have to be proactive, do our own research, ask the hard questions, and really dig into the details. Remember, it's your money, your future, your peace of mind that's on the line.
This case also shows why it's so important to diversify your investments. Don't put all your eggs in one basket, right? Spread your risk around, talk to a financial advisor, and make sure your investments match your goals and how much risk you're comfortable with.
And don't forget about the power of community. If you've been affected by financial misconduct or you're worried about an investment, reach out to those support groups and organizations we mentioned earlier. Sharing your story and connecting with others can make a big difference. It can help you feel empowered during a tough time.
Absolutely. There's strength in numbers. Knowing you're not alone can make all the difference in the world.
As we wrap up our deep dive into the Ashbrookes Group Limited loan note investigation, let's leave our listeners with one last thought. In a world where we're constantly bombarded with information, it's so important to be a little skeptical, to question what we hear, and to look for different perspectives.
Don't be afraid to challenge the way things are, to demand transparency, and to hold those in power accountable. Remember, knowledge is power, and the more informed we are, the better equipped we'll be to create a more responsible and ethical financial world for everyone.
The path to financial well-being is a journey. It takes constant learning, adapting, and being aware. Stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay empowered.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll be back soon with another investigation, uncovering the truth and helping you make smart financial choices. Until then, stay safe and stay savvy.